All right. So, welcome everyone. We're going to kick off our webinar now with some quick intros and then we'll dive into the good stuff. So, for those of you who don't know or may not know us, we are Chrometrics, and our firm's mission is to drive sustainable growth through digital experiences. We work with tons of amazing brands and focus on full funnel optimization through experimentation, personalization, and just overall digital experience. So, a few introductions. I'm Samantha McClure, the Director of Marketing at Chrometrics. I've been in marketing for about 15 years and have seen firsthand the difference that our performance focused method makes on results. I'm joined by Natalie Nicholas, our design lead, and she is really the creative mastermind behind a lot of high profile projects from brands like Mattel, UNICEF, Curology, Navex. She's really the expert in translating brand vision into these high performing web experiences. And last but not least, we have Dave Elbert. He's our EVP of product. With over 20 years experience in marketing, he leads our website design and development service line, in addition to product design, analytics, and R&D teams, all focused on developing technology and processes to really improve client success, but ultimately the consumer experience. So, enough kind of talk about us. Our goal today is to provide you with a clear understanding of how to redesign smarter, de-risk the process, and ultimately, we would like you to leave here with a clear path of how to utilize our method with your own site. And we're going to open it up at the end for any questions. So feel free to pop questions in the Q&A section or in the chat, and we'll make sure to address them at the end. All right. So here we go. Here's the good stuff. So every year we know consumers are shifting their expectations and it's accelerating, kind of like the snowball gaining speed and size downhill. People are expecting brands to know them. They're looking for personalized interactions and tailored experiences pretty much everywhere from social media to websites. And a quick side note that over 60% of CMOs and marketing teams are really reporting facing barriers in all of this. So, from technology to scalability to strategic challenges, everybody's kind of figuring out how to make this work at the speed that consumers are changing. So you pair all of that with consumers having these infinite choices and kind of becoming less loyal over time. One frustrating website experience is all it takes for them to kind of move on. And with more people looking and exploring new brands, we all know that the competition is for their attention is just growing. So it creates this big challenge. How do we ensure that our digital experiences are engaging, helpful, personalized enough to keep consumers around? And a lot of the times, this leads us to the need for a website redesign. And the issue is that most redesigns at the end of the day aren't delivering the results that we want them to as marketers. So after months of work, that new site launches, and at first everything seems fine and good, but within a couple of weeks, months, new realities can set in, and now we're dealing with possibly new friction points, different conversion dips, or some sort of unexpected user behavior that comes from the new site. All the excitement fades and our frustration really takes over. And now we are reactionarily seeing the website fail due to that disconnect. We've seen this across pretty much all organization types and sizes. Basecamp's a really good example. They launched a major redesign and saw millions in revenue pretty much like disappear overnight. And for every kind of like high profile company that comes out and says like, hey, we did this and here's how we fixed it, there are countless companies that we talk to or just kind of struggle in silence behind the scenes, realizing that once they've launched this redesign, it's didn't actually solve the problems and potentially created new ones. And so, we really took a look years ago at why these redesigns were going wrong for brands. And it comes down to new sites creating this visibility gap. When everything changes all at once, there's no way to isolate what's happening, what's improving, what's hurting performance. Was it that new hero section, that shift in navigation, that CTA placement, that, whatever it may be? What was it? And without a way to kind of track these global changes, our teams are just left making these educated guesses. And that's a really kind of scary and dangerous place for brands to be. We want to kind of shift to optimizing instead of reacting and scrambling to fix these issues. And as someone who has gone pre-Chrometrics through redesigns that didn't go as planned, you know firsthand that is frustrating, expensive. You know, not only is it monetarily expensive when performance takes a hit, but it can, you know, cause internal fallout and can really lead teams to end up either at odds, kind of debating what went wrong instead of coming together to move forward and find what works. And at the end of the day, it's not really any one team's fault. It's the process itself that is flawed. So I'm going to hand it over to Natalie to introduce our performance-focused approach to hopefully help fix all of these things.
All right, thanks, Samantha. So let's talk about how we do things differently here at Chrometrics. At Chrometrics, we take a design-forward, results-first approach. So what this looks like is instead of rolling out an entire redesign all at once, we replace that traditional hard launch with a series of structured tests. And this allows us to measure what works and what doesn't, and what drives growth ahead of time. So we validate global components throughout the process. And this method ensures that by the time the full redesign is ready, we've already optimized each element across the site. So the cumulative effect here is that you're having a redesigned site that drives measurable business growth. And then this approach also de-risks the redesign process, because if a test underperforms ahead of time, we can adjust it before rolling it out and having it impact the entire site. And then another bonus that our clients have noticed is because we're getting learnings sooner than the redesign is being rolled out, we can then apply those learnings across other channels such as paid, email, really the overall customer engagement. And instead of waiting months for that feedback post-launch, we're learning what your customers want in real time, and we're able to apply that and adapt faster than competitors. So as we've seen, the traditional redesign often has limited or negative impact on key business metrics, while the performance-focused method drives predictable improvements. And instead of opinion-based design decisions, we can use real-time customer data paired with deep customer analysis to guide the changes we're making. And rather than that one-shot, expensive, very large-scale redesign, maybe every few years, this process will set you up for continuous and ongoing improvement. So now all of a sudden, at the end of your redesign, you're ready and aligned to start designing and iterating just how large tech companies such as Amazon, Apple, and Google optimize their digital experiences. All right, and I will pass it over to Dave to explain how the process works in practice.
Sounds good. Thanks, Natalie. So one question we often get asked about this process is it's going to take longer than a traditional redesign, because often we're up against an immutable date, right? We're working against, maybe it's an event that's coming up, maybe there's a launch of a rebranding, and we just have that hard deadline that we have to work against. The quick answer to that question is we can launch the site in the same time that a typical redesign would launch in. And how we do that is by parallel pathing some of the activities. So what you're seeing here is a hypothetical timeline that illustrates this, where we're simultaneously doing things like customer journey analysis, technical audits, delving into platform strategies. And then when we move into our design phase, we're implementing our test and learn methods and incorporating those learnings into our build as they come in. So we've evolved this process over numerous redesigns and found an efficient way to work that still adheres to deadlines to really give the client that fresh new look, the new branding, all the new sort of aesthetically pleasing things, and a really great user experience but being able to incorporate that test and learn process into that. Oftentimes, we've got stuff to test before even any design work is needed, so we can do things like copy tests, and then test when we have some design direction established. So how do we get started on this? What is the process to really go through and implement something like this? Well, the first thing that we want to do is take all the data that we have and understand the customers so that we can start crafting a user experience that's built around their buying stages and cycles, and one that's also going to match up with visitor intent and motivation. We're also going to consider things like brand voice and customer sentiment and perception, and start imagining how we structure and position the website. Once we've established that direction, we want to create a design language around this that follows our brand standards. This is really going to define a lot of the base elements of the user experience. Natalie is going to take us through a practical example of this a little bit later in the webinar, so you can see a real-world experience of how we did this for a client. But ultimately, our goal in this space is to define what the user experience is going to be and gain uniformity around how it and the brand will be applied. So once we've established that, then we're really going to get into testing. And I think the difference here is we're not just looking at this like, hey, let's just get in and A/B test a bunch of stuff, and then you'll come up with a redesign. This process really leads us into very targeted A/B testing and a methodology to get the learnings that we want to really inform the redesign. So we're looking initially for predominantly things like global elements like navigation and calls to action. And then we're turning our attention to the high traffic, high converting opportunities, such as the homepage, lead forms, key landing pages, things like that. If it's an e-commerce site, that's where we might be looking at product positioning, PLPs, PDPs. This is where we're going to get those key learnings and the most insights to universally apply to the rest of the site. These learnings can also inform, as Natalie mentioned, a lot of those channel strategies outside the website. So just to reemphasize that. So also, it really works well in tandem if we're going to run some campaigns that coincide with the launch, because we can take those learnings and apply those to those campaign efforts in a parallel way. All right, so just to summarize, our phases look like this. We get into our kickoff and discovery, where again, we're going through and conducting that customer journey analysis to really inform our approach, uncovering all the technical facets of the initiative, things like, hey, are we sticking with the CMS we have? Are we sticking with the e-commerce platform we have? Are we replatforming as part of this effort? And really kind of defining all of those things. Then we get into our design and testing phase so that and like I said, we can do some testing while we're doing the design, but ultimately getting into those tests that inform the final website that we're going to then build and launch. Then we put our engineering team and our QA team to work to implement all of those things, to do all the platforming and technical and functional work that we need to do. Also making sure that we're thinking about things like SEO, technical SEO, performance, all of those things that you want to do in a typical redesign to have a successful launch. And then lastly, as we launch, we want to make sure that the site is working as it should. One thing that we really find throughout this process is that we get a lot of test ideas that can be really fast follows for testing once we have a launch. So there's going to be a lot of concepts that we might come up with. Maybe we're even doing some user testing along the way, and we're getting feedback about some of our designs. And we say, you know what, those are really great ideas. Let's test those right after we launch to basically validate more things. So it really helps to develop a test and learn roadmap ongoing after we launch the website. All right, and I'm going to hand it back to Natalie, I believe. Oh, wait, no, I'm taking this. Sorry. All right, so let's talk about a case study where we've done this. So going to talk a little bit about our work with navx.com. Some of the challenges that we had with this project were really Navex.com just needed to modernize the website. It was in, sore need of an update, and we really wanted to align it to the different buyers that are looking at Navex solutions and where they are in the buying cycle. They are a global company, and so we wanted to make sure that we are considering localized content for that global audience. Leads are really important to them. Most of the work is done through enterprise sales, and so it's a sales cycle, and getting leads from the website is crucial to their success. So we wanted to improve not only the lead volume, but the number of qualified leads that are coming in, make it easier to educate buyers through that sale, because it's a highly educated sales process. And then lastly, really creating a modular design system to make the site easy to manage ongoing. All right, so here's the before. And the funny thing that we kind of talked about with the client is the background color that you see here. They called it grayish. So we were really happy to be able to graduate from grayish. And so you can see here that we've got a really pretty kind of dated looking website, but we were able to bring a new modern website online. And like I said, between following that process of being able to test into that experience. So when we think about the challenges of the Navex project that I just relayed a minute ago, how did those really cascade into some of our goals and KPIs for how we went about this project? We knew we wanted to make data-driven decisions on a new site design. We wanted to make sure that it was modern and added in those dynamic elements. Again, we wanted to make it easy for the client to manage the content with a modular headless CMS. Our secondary objectives were to improve those baseline conversion rates across some of our key customer touch points. So things like get a demo, contact form, pricing, things like that. Learning about what conversions are most impactful for our users, and then being able to measure those things through very specific KPIs through the process. So things like aggregate conversions, CTA clicks that move people through the funnel, things like interaction with the navigation, and then being able to reduce things like exit and bounce rates. All right, so getting into how we solve this for them. So Natalie, I will let you take this part now.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Dave. So our design approach for Navex was really formulated around the project's goals and with the goal of driving meaningful outcomes. So as Dave mentioned, instead of designing a rigid one-size-fits-all website, we put together for them a modular design system, including reusable components that provided both flexibility and scalability for their site. So this approach allowed for both a cohesive look and feel across the site, as well as a scalable and flexible system that can evolve with their ongoing needs and even with the test learnings. For content strategy, we took a structured and data-informed approach. As Dave mentioned, in our process, we start with some preliminary user research and insights and use that to start defining and wireframing block types for Navex. From there, we took Navex's new brand guidelines and applied the styles across the block types. And then those block types were organized into the modular design system, as well as built into the CMS platform to enable a seamless content management strategy for Navex going forward. So we really want to make sure we're ensuring that the web was designed fully to brand standards and also prioritized an inclusive user experience. So how this looks is in order to maintain accessibility, we were applying best practices for contrast and typography to make sure that experience was inclusive for everyone. And in addition to that, we developed a digital application guide for NavX using their new brand styles to provide them with clear documentation on how to implement styles going forward. So on top of all of the wireframing and designs, we also explored with some interactive states and micro interactions. So subtle animations like the ones you're seeing here help guide users through the site and also improve usability by providing clear visual indicators like hover states, clicks, and transitions. All right. And then finally, as Dave mentioned, NavX is a global company. So in order to support their global audience, we wanted to make sure that our design was flexible and could adapt to multiple different languages. So we created these dynamic layouts that could accommodate varying text lengths and ensure that there is good legibility across and readability across all translations. So this allowed NavX to reach and engage users in multiple regions without compromising the experience. All right, and I'll pass it back to Dave to talk about how we tested into these designs.
Yeah, so I mean, if you've been through a website redesign before, I think a lot of what Natalie just talked about, you're probably pretty familiar with, right? A well thought out website redesign. I think we're following a lot of the tenets of that process in the creation of the design language and thinking about things like modular content blocks and thinking about things like localization, all of those things that are important when you're considering relaunching your website. But then going back to the test and learn approach that we're really touting here, what we did with NavX is thinking about a lot of those things that we wanted to test into that then laddered back into the KPIs that I talked about earlier. So wanted to think really heavily about things like navigation and how visitors traverse the website, being able to really think about the hierarchy and categorization of the pages on the site and what we're thinking about in terms of primary landing pages and secondary landing pages and testing into those types of things, being able to reduce clicks and through some of those micro interactions that Natalie talked about. A lot of descriptions and visual elements became important. And then, of course, really focusing on creating a great mobile experience and one that was really conducive to how visitors were coming and using the website when on a mobile device and really guiding them towards things like driving a lead or if they were in more of an educational state. So really testing through a lot of these different elements to then gain those learnings that we could continue to apply back and iterate through the process as we launch the new website. So when we're thinking about how we drive visitors through the funnel in this process, some of the things that we considered is really looking at competitors and doing a complete design and UX analysis of them, thinking about our buyer journeys and customizing our approach based on those buyer journeys. So again, really thinking about like where people are in the buying cycle and how we're going to reach them at each stage in the buying cycle. I mentioned the clickability of elements on the page, and then ultimately focusing on that bottom of the funnel as well. So making sure that we have an easy way to capture high quality leads through optimized leads and demo forms. So the big thing here is we, really achieved two things when we think about our goals. We wanted to set ourselves up for a higher converting user experience, but really also a do no harm approach where we mitigated risk. So Natalie talked about that a little bit earlier. So even if we completely launched the site and we saw that our metrics were relatively flat. That's not necessarily a bad thing because to both Natalie and Samantha's point earlier about how you don't know what you're introducing, they're really those unproven changes that can lead to a slide in your primary metrics and your conversion rates. So we really wanted to make sure that like not only would we improve things, but also that do no harm approach where we're mitigating risk. And you can see that we had some really net positive effects here. 13.4% increase in the engagement with our navigation. We kept our exit rate relatively flat. Actually, negative there is a good thing because less people are leaving, but that was relatively flat. We dramatically improved things like conversion rates on Contact Us, being able to look at things like pricing, and then improving metrics behind those requesting a demo. So it was a really great outcome for us and the client, being able to launch this new website that was really exciting and really modern and aligned with their brand, but at the same time, having a lot of these positive metrics to go alongside of it. So we knew that we were launching a high performing website that really aligned to the user experience.
Awesome. So we've thrown a lot at you guys in 30 minutes. Before we dive into our Q&A, we wanted to just kind of give you a quick wrap up. You're going to receive a copy of this deck with that project plan. So you're going to be able to use that with your own redesigns coming up. But we're always kind of available, so you'll get everybody's contact information as well. And we're always happy to jump on a 20-minute consult to help walk through anything that you're finding as a sticking point or a blocker, or to help you kind of execute that. So we do have some questions that came through the chat. And I think I will pass this one over to Dave or Natalie, whoever wants to answer this, but how do you determine what should be tested first?
Yeah, I think it really does go back to looking at those overarching objectives and the KPIs. So getting that information down first is super important to really understand what's important in terms of how you want the site to perform. And then thinking about really what we want to learn, because testing isn't just about getting better performance, it's also learning what we can about the customers. And a lot of times we'll find some pretty interesting insights about the customers based on how they behave relative to certain elements that we may present to them in that user experience. So it's having that desire to not only move the needle on the KPIs, but also presenting those questions at the outset of like, what do we want to learn about our customers?
Awesome. Another question just came through. What kind of CMS was Navex on in that example, and how CMS helped with the design system and setting those modular blocks?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the CMS was a headless CMS called Sanity, and the way that we were able to design it is through a lot of modular content blocks, as Natalie talked about. So Natalie, I don't know if you want to expound upon that at all.
Yeah, so we took some of the existing content blocks that were existing in Sanity, looked at how they were frameworked, like what fields they included, and really tried to consider that when putting together the new modular design system so that the content translation, when we migrated everything over, it would be it would be seamless. And in addition, yeah, we made a list of like 30 of the top content blocks that highlighted the most important information to users. And through the CMS, we were able to build different page types using each of those content blocks.
Awesome. What have we seen is a test that had the biggest impact within our redesigns? And I know that's kind of, obviously super dependent, but curious if you guys want to take a stab at that.
Natalie,
Yeah.
do you wanna grab that one?
Yeah, sure. I think the tests that I've always seen have the biggest impact are ones where we're taking a look at the navigation structure. That's like really kind of the blueprint of how users are navigating the site. So to really take a step back and think about your different users, the journeys that they're taking, and structuring your site around that can really have a huge impact on the performance of the site.
Awesome. We got another question come through for the Navex project or this process in general. Were the modules and blocks released into production after the winning test, or was the full redesign released at once after each section was tested?
So I believe we were using a testing platform to test into some of the elements that Dave had showcased, like the navigation. In the background, we were developing in the CMS the different modules. And so while we were testing, we were gathering those learnings that we could then apply to the rest of the site before the full redesign rolled out all at once.
Awesome. That looks like we have answered, oh, maybe another question came through. Was there any type of user feedback solution implemented to keep learning and improving over time? And I think that's a good question just in general. This, process itself sets us up for that continuous test and learn. Kind of what I talked about in the beginning. Like we're moving at such a fast pace from consumers to what's happening in the market. You really should not be redoing your site every 5 years. You should be implementing tests like this to redesign your site, but it also sets you up for that continuous feedback loop and testing, whether you're doing traditional A/B testing or user feedback, all of it is important data to get in.
Yeah, and there are times when you may have to go through a redesign, right? Like, I mean, as much as we are huge proponents of that continuous test and learn culture and being able to iterate into your site so that you don't have to redesign every 3 years. There are things that happen that would cause you to redesign. Maybe the organization decides, hey, we're going through a rebranding, or we're going through a bit pivot in our business strategy, or we are launching different product lines that are going to drastically change the complexion of what we do, and we need the website to reflect that. So there may be a lot of reasons to redesign. And to go back to the root of the question, I do think it's valuable to do user testing through the redesign process so you can start to get a kind of a baseline of how people are going to react to your designs. And I think there's two things that you can take away with those. One, I think they're going to inform what you're doing in the redesign. Two, I think they help you develop a roadmap for after you launch. Because then based on the feedback that people had, especially things about how you might have merchandised things or product positioning or messaging, there's lots of different ways to slice and dice that. And so after a site launch, you're going to have a plethora of tests that you'll be able to run based on some of the user testing that you might have done during the process.
Great answer. And last one, we had another question come through. Do you see, and I think this is going to be a Dave one, do you see anything cool with AI to help this whole process? And our teams are doing a ton with AI in our own system. So is there anything specific to this performance-focused redesign method?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that you can do to start in, especially in the customer journey analysis piece that we talked about earlier. That's like in the beginning of the process. There's so much data that you can take and feed through AI to start getting a sense of what the consumer wants. So for example, being able to hook up AI to your customer support logs. So think about things like support requests, call logs, those chat transcripts, those types of things, being able to feed it into AI and understand sort of customer sentiment from that, learning things about, their different motivations and stuff like that. A lot of that stuff that you're not going to necessarily learn about how people move through your funnel, but once they actually become customers, you can then take back and apply to people that you want to become customers, right? Or if your website is serving people from a loyalty standpoint where they're coming back and again, making purchases, cross sells, upsells, those types of things. So there's a lot of data that you can feed into AI that will help you understand some of those things, little hidden gems that you might not get otherwise.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for attending. We will kind of compile all this, get you the recording, get you the project plan and our contact information. And we're always down to have a more dedicated conversation to your specific brand. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.